In terms of the theme, and this is more the theological unity between these letters, we've looked at Romans and Galatians and Corinthians. We noticed that there was an emphasis on soteriology in Romans, Galatians, and Corinthians. There was an emphasis on eschatology in Thessalonians. But these prison epistles are the great epistles of focusing on the great doctrine of the church. They're sometimes called the ecclesiological letters. Of course, this doesn't mean that salvation and soteriology are at the margin. Union with Christ is a grand theme in these epistles. But probably, I think this is fair to say, the prominence of the doctrine of the church is certainly clear. It's the most prominent doctrine. Now, coming to Ephesians, we are immediately faced with a problem because the authenticity of this letter is disputed probably more than any other outside of the pastoral epistles. And the pastoral epistles, you know, are which epistles? Timothy. Right, 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus are the pastoral, so-called pastoral epistles. They're addressed to one person, a pastor, and deal with a lot of pastoral issues relating to being a pastor and the like. The authenticity of these letters is disputed by many critical scholars and even some so-called evangelicals. But after these, the letter to the Ephesians is also disputed. Why? Well, we're told that there are differences of style. There's the absence of the customary greeting in Paul. You know how Paul usually starts with his salutation and then his thanksgiving and prayer. It's different here in Ephesians. And also there's the absence of the greetings at the end to people in a church which presumably Paul would have known so closely. He spent 1.5 years at least in Ephesus. And so scholars say we would expect a long list of names of people who he wanted to greet in particular. And instead, what do we have? We have a reference here to Tychicus, and that's it, right? No greetings whatsoever. This is very unlike what we have in Corinthians, Galatians even, and Romans especially, Colossians and elsewhere. Let's see if I don't mention it here, but I'm sure it'll be in your textbook. In some of the manuscripts, there's not even a reference here to the Ephesians in the Vaticanus or Sinaiticus or both. I forget which one it is, but it doesn't even say to the church which is at Ephesus. It says, Paul, an apostle to the saints and the faithful in Jesus Christ, grace be to you and peace. And so some have claimed that manuscript evidence as either suggesting that this was not written to the Ephesians at all, and even that Paul did not write it, because that would have been very atypical of Paul to write to anything and anyone other than a particular church which he knew. Now, some suppose that it was not written to the Ephesians, as I mentioned here. That's actually the third point. I don't mention the manuscript evidence, what it was. You'll find that in your textbook, but it's either the Sinaiticus or the Vaticanus, one of the ancient unseals. Others explain this unusual character of the letter, the epistle to the Ephesians, as being perhaps a circular letter, and for that reason being more systematic in character, less personal, less occasional, and more sparse in terms of greetings. Now, as such, I don't think we need to reject this idea out of hand. There's nothing wrong with a letter being written, but then also circulating to another church or to an area. I think, in fact, that is a very plausible theory. But I don't think, as a result, that it cannot be linked to the Ephesians, but rather what I would imagine is that it was written to the Ephesians, but it was intended to serve also the churches in Asia Minor, of which the Ephesian church was certainly the most well known. So it may have been a circular letter. And we find that elsewhere, don't we? In Colossians chapter see if I can find that reference here.
4.
Colossians chapter 4, thank you. Verse 16, and when this epistle is read among you, cause that it be read also in the church of the Laodiceans, and that ye likewise read the epistle from Laodicea. So there's precedence for one or other letter of Paul being aimed at more than one congregation. One theory is that it was actually the letter addressed to the Laodiceans, which we have otherwise no record of. And yet we can't be sure of that. There's very little in the text itself to support that at all. And that would go against the abundance of manuscripts which do link it to the Ephesians. One source I consulted put it this way: the most probable hypothesis was that the epistle was indeed inscribed to the Ephesians, but that it was intended for a larger circle of readers, and therefore purposely contained nothing but what was common and interesting to all. Now, what's the character of the epistle to the Ephesians? Well, it's systematic concerning the church, God's purpose with the church. It has an emphasis on unity in the church. Chapter 4, verse 3 through 6. I, therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you that you walk worthy of the vocation wherewith ye are called, with all lowliness and meekness, with long-suffering, forbearing one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. So this is a major concern of Paul in this epistle, that the Ephesians know and enjoy and foster the unity which Christians have among themselves. And connected with that, we have the doctrine of union with Christ, here more than anywhere else. The phrase in Christ, or in Him, or forms like that, occurs here 35 times in the epistle to the Ephesians, which is very large for only 6 chapters. In Christ, in Christ, in Christ. The doctrinal exposition is interrupted by 2 prayers, one at the beginning, centered on knowledge, and the other, chapter 3, focusing on love. Knowledge and love, which correspond to the sections of doctrine and practice. He prays and gives thanks with respect to knowledge and uses the context there to inculcate truth, doctrine, knowledge. And then in this 3rd chapter, he focuses and prays with respect to love, the knowledge of love, the experience of love, the exhibition of love. And this heads up the section which calls for Christian living. It's the expression of this love. That's an interesting feature of the epistle to the Ephesians.